Have you ever just looked at the incredible, mind-boggling variety of life on our planet? I mean, from the tiniest microbe to the biggest blue whale, and just wondered, how? How did we get here? For a long, long time, this was one of the biggest mysteries out there. Well, today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the beautiful, elegant mechanism that explains it all: evolution.
All right, here's the game plan. We're starting at square one, asking where life itself even came from. Then we'll put on our detective hats and sift through the mountain of evidence for evolution. After that, we'll zoom in on Darwin's big idea, natural selection, see how it got a massive upgrade with modern genetics, and finally, look at how this whole process can create entirely new species from scratch.
Okay, so first things first. Before we can even begin to talk about how life changes, we got to tackle the question of how life starts. And for a very long time, this was a huge debate. So you had these two big ideas going head-to-head. On one side, you had abiogenesis, the old idea of spontaneous generation. This was the belief that life could just, poof, appear out of nowhere from non-living stuff. You know, like people thinking maggots just magically appeared on rotting meat. Then on the other side, you had biogenesis, the idea that life only comes from other life. Seems totally obvious to us today, right? But proving it? That took a real stroke of genius.
And that genius was Louis Pasteur, with this incredibly elegant experiment using these special swan neck flasks. What he did was he boiled broth in them to kill anything living inside. Now the cool part is that the S-shaped neck let air in, but it trapped any dust or microbes from the air. And guess what? The broth stayed perfectly clear for ages. But the second he broke that neck off, or even just tilted the flask to let the broth touch the trapped dust, bam, the broth was teeming with life. The conclusion was crystal clear. Life didn't just appear, it had to be introduced from the outside. Biogenesis was the winner.
Now, of course, there were other ideas out there. The theory of special creation held that life was created just as we see it today. Then you had panspermia, which is the idea that life didn't start here at all, but hitched a ride to Earth from space. But the theory that really got traction in the scientific community was chemical evolution. This is the idea that here, on the very early Earth, the basic building blocks of life formed from simpler, non-living molecules in a kind of primordial soup.
Okay, so Pasteur proves life comes from life. But that just opens up a whole new can of worms, right? If all life comes from other life, why isn't everything the same? Why this unbelievable diversity? And that, my friends, is where we get into the rock-solid evidence for evolution.
You have to understand, the theory of evolution isn't just based on one single thing. It's like a legal case built on mountains of evidence from totally different fields. We're talking about paleontology, anatomy, genetics, and they all point to the exact same conclusion. Let's look at some of the heavy hitters.
Let's start with anatomy. A really powerful piece of evidence comes from something called homologous structures. This is when you see different animals with body parts that are built on the same basic plan but are used for completely different jobs.
This is so cool. Check this out. You have a human arm for grabbing, a cat's leg for walking, a whale's flipper for swimming, and a bat's wing for flying. I mean, totally different functions. But if you look under the hood, at the bones, it's the exact same blueprint. One upper arm bone, two forearm bones, a bunch of wrist bones, and then the finger bones. It's the same kit of parts, just tweaked and modified for different lifestyles. The clearest explanation? They all inherited that blueprint from a common ancestor. Now, to really get a grip on what makes homologous structures so special, we got to look at the flip side of the coin: analogous structures. These are body parts that do the same job but evolved completely independently.
The textbook example? The wing of a butterfly versus the wing of a bird. Yeah, they're both used for flying, but that's where the similarity ends. A bird's wing is made of bone and feathers. An insect's wing is a totally different material, chitin. They don't share a winged ancestor. It's just that nature solved the problem of how to fly two separate times. We call this convergent evolution.
And the evidence just keeps piling up. The fossil record is like a giant timeline, showing us how life has changed over millions of years. Then there's embryology. If you look at the early embryos of a fish, a chicken, and a human, they are shockingly similar. And maybe most powerful of all, biochemistry. Almost every single living thing on this planet uses the exact same genetic code, DNA, and the same energy currency, ATP. It's like we're all running on the same basic operating system. So, the evidence that life evolves is just overwhelming. But the billion-dollar question was how? What's the engine driving all this change? That was the puzzle that two brilliant naturalists, Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace, cracked at the same time.
They came up with a mechanism that was as simple as it was profound.
They called it natural selection, and it works in 4 logical steps. 1. Organisms produce way more offspring than can possibly survive. 2. In any group of those offspring, there's natural variation. No 2 are exactly alike. 3. Some of those variations give an individual a slight edge. They're a little better at finding food or avoiding predators. We call this being more fit. And 4, and this is key, those winning traits get passed on to the next generation. You let this process run for thousands of generations, and the whole population starts to look more and more like those successful individuals.
And this quote just nails the whole idea of survival of the fittest. See, fittest doesn't mean biggest or strongest or smartest. It just means you are the best fit for your specific environment, right here, right now. It's all about being adaptable.
And we can actually see this happen, which is incredible. The classic case is the peppered moth in England. Before the Industrial Revolution, most of these moths were light-colored, which was great camouflage on light-colored trees. But when factories started coating everything in black soot, the trees got dark. All of a sudden, the rare, dark moths had the advantage. They survived, had more kids, and soon almost all the moths were dark. Then, when Clean Air Acts were passed, the trees got light again, and boom, the light-colored moths made a comeback. That's natural selection, right there in front of our eyes.
Darwin's theory was absolutely revolutionary, but there was one huge piece of the puzzle he was missing: genetics. He knew traits were passed down, but he had no idea how. It wasn't until scientists merged Darwin's ideas with the new science of genetics that we got the complete picture, something we now call the modern synthesis.
With genetics, we can get super precise. We can now define evolution in its simplest terms. It is a change in allele frequency in a population over time. Alleles are just different versions of a gene. So for those moths, there was a light color allele and a dark color allele. When the percentage of the dark color allele went up in the population, that, right there, was evolution in action. Simple as that.
Now, to really understand what causes change, scientists first needed a baseline, a control group, if you will, a model of a population that is not evolving at all. That's what the Hardy-Weinberg Principle is. It describes this imaginary, perfectly stable population where nothing ever changes. So this principle basically says that the gene pool of a population will stay exactly the same generation after generation if, and this is a big F, a bunch of strict conditions are met. Things like no mutations, no one moving in or out, completely random mating, and no natural selection. And of course, in the real world, that never ever happens.
And that's the whole point. Because those ideal conditions don't exist in nature, change is inevitable. These 5 factors are the disturbing influences that are always at work, always messing with that perfect equilibrium. You've got new traits popping up from mutation, random chance events called genetic drift, populations mixing through gene flow, genes getting shuffled through recombination, and all the while, natural selection is sorting through the results. These are the engines of evolution.
Which brings us to our final, huge question. We've seen how populations can change over time, but how do you go from, say, a population of moths changing color to the creation of a brand new species, something completely distinct?
This process is called speciation, and the absolute key ingredient is something called reproductive isolation. That's the point of no return, when 2 populations can no longer interbreed and have fertile offspring. Usually, it starts with a physical barrier. Imagine a population of squirrels gets separated by a new canyon forming. Over thousands of years, the 2 groups evolve on their own paths, adapting to their different environments. Eventually, they become so genetically different that even if that canyon disappeared, they couldn't successfully mate anymore. At that point, congratulations, you have a new species.
So you see how all these pieces click together? From Darwin's brilliant first look at natural selection, to the precision of modern genetics, to how species themselves are born, we now have this incredible, comprehensive framework that forms the very foundation of all modern biology.
The story of evolution is a story of constant change, stretching back billions of years. But it leaves us with a pretty mind-blowing question to chew on. As we now develop incredible technologies like genetic engineering, and as we reshape entire ecosystems across the globe, have we as humans become the single most powerful evolutionary force on this planet? And if so, what on earth does that mean for the future of life?